The first gunshot shattered the morning calm over the small town of Redemption Creek, Colorado, 1876, as Penelope Greene ducked behind the water trough outside the general store, clutching her medical bag to her chest. She hadn't been in town a week, and already she was caught in the middle of another confrontation. As the town's new doctor, one of the few female physicians who'd braved the Western Territories, she'd expected resistance, but not daily shootouts that tested her surgical skills before breakfast. "Stay down, Doc," shouted Sheriff Taylor as he crouched behind a barrel, his revolver drawn. Daniels O'Malley's on another rampage. Penelope peeked over the edge of the trough, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she caught sight of the infamous Cowboy. Daniels O'Malley stood in the middle of the dusty street, his stance wide and dangerous, revolver hanging loosely at his side. His reputation had preceded him, a former Confederate soldier turned bounty hunter, rumored to have tracked down some of the West's most notorious outlaws. But these days, he seemed more intent on drinking himself into oblivion at the Silver Spur Saloon than bringing in criminals. "I ain't looking for trouble, Sheriff," Daniels called out, his voice rough like gravel. "Just came to tell Michaels he's got until sundown to pay what he owes me." "There are proper channels for debt collection, O'Malley," the sheriff responded. Daniels holstered his gun with a fluid motion that spoke of years of practice. "Not out here, there ain't." Penelope watched as he turned toward the saloon, sunlight glinting off his dark blonde hair. His broad shoulders were tense beneath his worn leather vest, and he moved with the wariness of a wounded predator. As the confrontation diffused, Penelope rose from her hiding place, brushing dust from her skirts. She had patients waiting at her small clinic, but something about the haunted look in the cowboy's eyes caught her attention. As a doctor, she recognized pain when she saw it, and Daniels O'Malley carried his like an invisible wound. The bell above her clinic door jingled as Penelope entered, greeted by the smell of carbolic acid and herbs. Mrs. Wilkins sat waiting with her young son, who had a persistent cough. Penelope pushed thoughts of the mysterious cowboy aside and focused on her patients. By midday, she'd treated the boy's bronchial condition, splinted a ranch hand's broken finger, and dispensed medicine for old Mr. Peterson's rheumatism. She was washing her hands when a commotion outside drew her attention. Wiping her hands dry, she hurried to the door just in time to see Daniels O'Malley stagger and collapse face down in the street. Without hesitation, Penelope grabbed her bag and ran to him. "Help me get him inside," she called to the onlookers. Two men stepped forward, lifting the unconscious cowboy and carrying him to her clinic. "What happened?" she asked as they laid him on her examining table. "Been drinking since dawn," one man answered. "Never seen him this bad before." Penelope dismissed the men and turned her attention to her patient. Daniels O'Malley was a striking man, even in his current state, strong jaw shadowed with stubble, features that might have been carved from stone. She checked his pulse, rapid and irregular, and noted the pallor beneath his sun-weathered skin. When she unbuttoned his shirt to listen to his heart, she gasped at the sight of the scar that ran from his right shoulder across his chest, the mark of a bullet that had come dangerously close to his heart. As she pressed her stethoscope to his chest, his eyes flew open, and he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "Trying to keep you from dying in the street, Mr. O'Malley," Penelope replied calmly, despite her racing heart. "You collapsed, and I'm examining you to determine the cause." He released her wrist, but made no move to sit up. "Waste of your time, document. Nothing wrong with me that ain't been wrong for years." "And what might that be?" she asked, continuing her examination despite his glare. Daniels O'Malley looked at her with eyes the color of a summer storm. "My heart don't work," he said flatly. "Not since Shiloh." Penelope placed her stethoscope over his chest again, listening to the irregular beat. "Your heart is still beating, Mr. O'Malley, though rather erratically. I suspect you have an arrhythmia, possibly from the wound that left this scar." "Told you," he muttered. "Broken beyond repair." She leaned closer, meeting his gaze directly. "Then I'll be the one to restart it," she whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or disbelief before the shutters came down again. "You'd be wasting your time, Doc," he said, pushing himself to a sitting position with a grimace. "Some things can't be fixed. I'm a doctor, Mr. O'Malley. Fixing broken things is precisely what I do." He stood, swaying slightly before finding his balance. "Not this time," he said, buttoning his shirt with fingers that trembled slightly. "Keep your medicine and your promises for someone who deserves them." Before she could respond, he was gone, the doors swinging shut behind him. Penelope stared after him, a strange feeling settling in her chest. In her 3 years as a physician, she'd encountered all manner of patients, stubborn, frightened, grateful, belligerent, but none had affected her quite like Daniels O'Malley. Perhaps because she recognized something in him that echoed in herself, a weariness that went deeper than bone, a hurt that never quite healed. Over the next week, Penelope threw herself into her work, establishing her practice in Redemption Creek despite the skepticism of some townspeople who doubted a woman's ability to practice medicine. She'd faced such prejudice throughout her education at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania and during her residency at the New England Hospital for Women and Children. The frontier presented new challenges, but she was determined to prove her worth. She didn't see Daniels O'Malley during that time, though she heard plenty about him from her patients. He'd come to Redemption Creek 6 months earlier, taking odd jobs and bounty hunting assignments. No one knew much about his past, except that he'd fought for the Confederacy and had been wandering since the war ended 11 years ago. On a cool Saturday evening, as Penelope was closing her clinic, a commotion erupted from the direction of the Silver Spur. Gunshots rang out, followed by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Moments later, Sheriff Taylor appeared at her door, supporting a bleeding Daniels O'Malley. "Bar fight," the sheriff explained breathlessly. O'Malley took a knife to the ribs, defending a saloon girl from one of the Manning brothers. "Get him on the table," Penelope directed, already reaching for her instruments. The wound was deep, bleeding profusely from between Daniel's ribs. She cut away his shirt, revealing the extent of the damage. "Will he live, Doc?" the sheriff asked, his face grave. "He will if I have anything to say about it," Penelope replied, working quickly to stop the bleeding. "I need hot water and clean linens. And whiskey for sterilization, not drinking." As the sheriff left to fetch supplies, Daniels regained consciousness, his eyes focusing slowly on Penelope's face. "We meet again, Doc," he rasped. "You seem determined to test my medical skills, Mr. O'Malley," she said, pressing a clean cloth to his wound. "Lie still. You've lost blood, and that knife came dangerously close to your lung." "Wouldn't be the first time something sharp found its way between my ribs," he muttered, wincing as she applied pressure. "Probably deserved it anyway." "No one deserves this," she countered, accepting the supplies from the returning sheriff. "Sheriff, I'll need privacy to treat him properly." Once alone with her patient, Penelope worked methodically to clean and suture the wound. Daniels remained conscious throughout, his jaw clenched against the pain as the whiskey-soaked needle passed through his flesh. "You've a steady hand, Doc," he said, watching her work. "Most physicians I've known would have had me half dead from blood loss by now." "I've had practice," she replied, tying off another suture. "I spent 2 years in a Boston hospital before coming west." "What brought you to this godforsaken place? Doesn't seem fitting for an educated lady." Penelope paused, considering her answer. "The same thing that brings most people west, I suppose. A new beginning. Running from something, then," he said, his perceptiveness surprising her. She met his gaze. "Aren't we all?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." When she finished bandaging his torso, she helped him sit up slowly. "You'll need to rest. That wound could reopen if you move too quickly." "Can't stay here," he protested. "Got a room at the boarding house." "You can't walk that far tonight," she insisted. "I have a cot in the back room. You'll stay there until morning." Too weak to argue, Daniels allowed her to help him to the small room behind her examining room. As she settled him on the cot, his hand caught hers. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. O'Malley." "Daniels," he corrected. "After you've had your hands inside a man, seems right you should use his given name." A smile tugged at her lips. "Very well, Daniels. You can call me Penelope." "Penelope," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. "It suits you." She felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer night. "Rest now. Doctor's orders." In the morning, she found him already awake, sitting on the edge of the cot examining his bandages. "You do fine work," he commented as she entered. "Barely feels like I was gutted at all." You weren't gutted, she corrected, checking his temperature with the back of her hand against his forehead. No fever, a good sign. But you were fortunate. An inch deeper, and we'd be having a different conversation. Wouldn't be having one at all, more likely, he said with that same ghost of a smile. Luck's been on my side too long. Bound to run out eventually. Is that what you're hoping for? She asked sharply, surprising both of them with her tone. His eyes narrowed. What makes you say that? The drinking, the fighting, the bounty hunting. They're all ways to court death without admitting that's what you're doing. Daniel stood, wincing slightly but maintaining his dignity. You don't know me, document. No, she agreed, I don't. But I know pain when I see it, and you're drowning in it. For a moment, she thought he might argue, but instead, he reached for his ruined shirt. I should go. Wait, Penelope said, retrieving a clean shirt from a cabinet. It belonged to my brother. He was about your size. Daniels accepted the shirt with a nod of thanks. As he carefully pulled it on, she couldn't help noticing the map of scars that covered his torso, the legacy of a violent life. Your brother a doctor too? He asked as he buttoned the shirt. No, she replied, a familiar ache settling in her chest. He was a Union soldier. He died at Antietam. The air between them suddenly felt charged with unspoken history. They had been on opposite sides of the bloodiest conflict in American history, and yet here they were, a Confederate veteran and a Union soldier's sister, connected by a borrowed shirt and a knife wound. I'm sorry, Daniel said finally, his voice low. War's a terrible thing. Yes, Penelope agreed softly. It is. He left soon after, promising to return in 2 days to have his stitches checked. Penelope watched him walk down the street, his gait steady despite his injury. There was something about Daniel's O'Malley that called to her, a wounded soul in need of healing, perhaps. Or maybe it was simpler than that, the connection between two people who recognized in each other a similar kind of loneliness. True to his word, Daniels returned 2 days later, and again 2 days after that. Each visit lasted a little longer than necessary, their conversations gradually expanding beyond his wound to touch on safer subjects: the changing weather, town gossip, books they'd read. Penelope learned that he had taught himself to read by lamplight during the war, working through a tattered copy of the Odyssey he'd found in an abandoned farmhouse. I liked how far from home he was, Daniels explained when she expressed surprise at his choice. Seemed fitting at the time. By his 4th visit, when she removed his stitches with careful precision, Penelope had begun to look forward to their encounters with an eagerness that both thrilled and alarmed her. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to feel such interest in a man. You have steady hands, Daniels observed as she finished removing the last stitch. His own hand caught hers, turning it over to examine her palm. But they're not soft. You've worked hard. Medicine isn't a profession for the delicate, she replied, acutely aware of the warmth of his touch. Neither is the frontier. He released her hand reluctantly. Why did you really come west, Penelope? Boston has hospitals that would value a doctor with your skills. She turned away, busying herself with her instruments. Boston also has memories I preferred to leave behind. A man, he guessed. A fiancé, she confirmed, her back still to him. A surgeon who decided he couldn't marry a woman who insisted on practicing medicine herself. He believed a wife should concern herself with home and family, not setting bones and delivering babies. Sounds like a fool, Daniels said simply. Penelope turned to face him, surprised by his assessment. Most men would agree with him. I'm not most men, he replied, holding her gaze. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then the clinic door opened, breaking the spell as Mrs. Peterson entered with her grandson in tow. I should go, Daniels said, reaching for his hat. Thank you for your care, document. That evening, as Penelope was walking home from a late house call, she noticed a figure on horseback following at a distance. Alarmed, she quickened her pace, but the rider caught up to her at the edge of town. Evening, Doc, came Daniel's familiar voice. Bit late for you to be out alone, isn't it? Relief washed over her. I was called to the Reynolds farm. Their youngest has croup. And they couldn't come to you? He asked, dismounting to walk beside her. The child was too ill to move, she explained. And they lived too far to leave him untreated until morning. Daniels nodded, leading his horse by the reins. Still, these roads aren't safe after dark. Especially not for a woman alone. I've managed thus far, she pointed out, though she appreciated his concern. Maybe so, he conceded, but there's no harm in having company for the journey home. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the soft thud of their boots on the packed earth and the occasional snort from his horse. I leave tomorrow, Daniels said suddenly. Got word of a bounty north of here. Man wanted for stage robbery in Wyoming territory. Penelope felt a strange hollowness open inside her at his words. How long will you be gone? Hard to say. Could be weeks. Might be longer if the trail's cold. They reached her small house at the edge of town, a modest cabin she'd purchased from a widow returning east. Penelope turned to face him in the pale moonlight. Be careful, Daniels, she said softly. Your wound is still healing. Are you worried about me, Doc? He asked, a genuine smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Professionally speaking, of course, she replied, matching his teasing tone while hiding the truth that she was indeed worried, and for reasons that went beyond medical concern. Of course, he echoed, his smile fading as his expression grew serious. Penelope, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. Then, with a resigned shake of his head, he tipped his hat. Good night, document. Take care of yourself while I'm gone. You as well, Daniels. She watched him ride away, a silhouette against the star-studded sky, and wondered at the sudden emptiness she felt in his absence. The following weeks passed slowly. Penelope immersed herself in her practice, gaining the trust of even the most skeptical townsfolk through her skill and dedication. She delivered babies, set broken bones, treated fevers, and dispensed medicines and advice in equal measure. Yet throughout her busy days, thoughts of Daniels O'Malley surfaced unbidden, wondering where he was, if he was safe, if his wound had fully healed. Autumn arrived, painting the surrounding mountains with splashes of gold and crimson. One crisp morning, as Penelope was grinding herbs for a tincture, Sheriff Taylor burst into her clinic. Doc, you're needed at the livery stable, he said breathlessly. O'Malley's back, and he's in bad shape. Penelope's heart leapt and then plummeted. She grabbed her bag and followed the sheriff at a run, dreading what she might find. Daniels lay on a pile of hay in the stable's back corner, his face ashen beneath a layer of trail dust and dried blood. A crowd had gathered, which Penelope quickly dispersed with firm instructions. What happened? She asked as she knelt beside him, already assessing his injuries. Ambushed, Daniels managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Got the bounty, but his friends took exception. He had been shot twice, once through the fleshy part of his left thigh and once in his right shoulder. The wounds had been crudely bandaged, but infection had set in, leaving him feverish and weak. We need to move him to my clinic, Penelope directed. Carefully, once he was settled on her examining table, she cut away the filthy bandages and cleaned his wounds thoroughly, her heart aching at each pained sound he tried to suppress. The shoulder wound was the most concerning. The bullet remained lodged against his collarbone. I need to remove the bullet, she told him, preparing a solution of chloroform. This will help with the pain. Daniels caught her wrist. No drugs, he rasped. Had a friend. Never woke up from chloroform. Daniels, this will be excruciating without it. His grip tightened. Been through worse. Just give me something to bite down on. Reluctantly, Penelope folded a leather strap and placed it between his teeth. With Sheriff Taylor and the blacksmith holding Daniels down, she began the delicate process of extracting the bullet from his shoulder. Daniels remained conscious throughout, his body rigid with agony, but remarkably still. When she finally dropped the misshapen lead ball into a basin with a metallic clink, he released a shuddering breath around the leather strap. Worst part's over, she assured him, quickly cleaning and suturing the wound. The leg wound is clean through, no bullet to remove. By the time she finished treating both injuries, Daniels had finally lost consciousness, his face gray with exhaustion and pain. Penelope dismissed her assistants and sat beside him, monitoring his breathing and pulse through the night. In the small hours of the morning, his fever spiked dangerously. Penelope bathed his face and chest with cool water, speaking to him in low, soothing tones as he thrashed and mumbled in delirium. Stay with me, Daniels, she whispered, pressing a cold cloth to his burning forehead. Fight this. Can't, he muttered, his eyes opening but unseeing. Too tired of fighting. Then fight for me, she said fiercely, taking his hand in hers. I didn't restart your heart just to let it stop now. Something in her voice seemed to reach him. His fingers tightened around hers, and his restless movements calmed. As dawn broke over the mountains, his fever finally broke with it. For the next week, Penelope kept Daniels in her clinic, watching over him as he slowly regained his strength. During his more lucid moments, he told her about his bounty hunt, how he'd tracked the stage robber to a mining camp in the mountains, only to be ambushed by the man's accomplices after making the capture. Got the reward money, at least, he said with a weak smile. Enough to last a while, if I'm careful. And will you be? Penelope asked, changing his bandages with gentle hands. Careful, I mean. He caught her gaze, his eyes clear for the first time in days. Got more reason to be now, I reckon. As Daniels recovered, their relationship shifted subtly. His gruff exterior softened in her presence, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been before war and wandering had hardened him. Penelope, too, found herself sharing more of her past, her struggle to be accepted as a physician, the loss of her brother, her broken engagement. One evening, as October winds rattled the clinic windows, Daniels sat propped against pillows while Penelope read aloud from a volume of Tennyson's poetry she'd brought west with her. The lamplight cast a warm glow over them both, creating an intimate circle in the gathering darkness. You read well, Daniels commented when she paused. Makes me hear the words differently. My father taught literature at a small college in Pennsylvania, she explained. He read to us every night poetry, novels, history. He believed in the power of words to expand the mind. Smart man, Daniels said. My pa could barely write his name. Didn't hold with book learning. Said it made men soft. And yet here you are, enjoying poetry. Penelope observed with a smile. What would he think of that? He died before the war, Daniels replied, his expression distant. Probably for the best. He'd have been ashamed of what I became after. Which is, Daniels looked down at his hands, strong, capable hands that had taken lives. A killer, a drifter, a man without purpose. I see a man who's survived terrible things, Penelope countered softly, who's made a life in a harsh world, who protects others, even at cost to himself. He shook his head, unconvinced. You see what you want to see, document. I see you, Daniels O'Malley, she insisted. More clearly than you see yourself, perhaps. Their gazes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Daniels looked away, breaking the connection. Getting late, he said gruffly. You should rest. 2 days later, against Penelope's advice, Daniels insisted on returning to his room at the boarding house. Can't impose on your kindness forever, he said as he carefully pulled on his coat. Besides, you need your clinic space for actual sick folks. You are an actual sick person, she protested, but he was determined. I'll come by tomorrow for you to check the wounds, he promised. But I need to stand on my own 2 feet again. Reluctantly, Penelope watched him leave, his gait still stiff but improving. True to his word, he returned the next day, and the next, always with some small gift, a perfect pine cone, a piece of quartz he'd found months before, wildflowers that had survived the autumn chill. As November arrived with its shorter days and frosty mornings, Penelope found herself looking for Daniels whenever she walked through town. Their paths crossed frequently at the general store, outside the post office, along the creek where she gathered certain medicinal herbs. Sometimes these encounters seemed coincidental. Other times, she suspected he was deliberately seeking her out, just as she found reasons to walk past the livery stable where he'd taken on work while his wounds healed. One Sunday afternoon, as Penelope was returning from a house call, Daniels fell into step beside her, leading his horse. He looked better than he had in weeks. The color returned to his face, his movements fluid and strong again. Thought you might like some company on your walk, he said by way of greeting. I would, she replied with a smile. How's your shoulder today? Healing well, thanks to your care, he said, flexing it slightly. Might even be able to draw my gun without wincing soon. Is that a necessary skill for a livery stable worker? He chuckled, the sound warm and surprisingly youthful. Probably not. But old habits die hard. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following the path that led along the creek and into a small stand of aspens, their golden leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. I've been thinking, Daniel said finally, About staying in Redemption Creek. Permanently, I mean. Penelope's heart quickened. What about bounty hunting? Reckon I've hunted enough men, he replied, his voice thoughtful. Time to put down some roots, maybe. Livery owner's talking about selling. Says he's got gold fever. Wants to try his luck in the Black Hills. You'd buy the stable? He nodded. Got the reward money. And I've always had a way with horses. Might be a decent life. The unspoken question hung between them: what role, if any, she played in this decision. Penelope found herself hoping, for the first time in years, that a man might see a future that included her. They reached a small clearing where the creek widened into a still pool, reflecting the blue sky and golden trees like a perfect mirror. Daniels secured his horse to a tree branch and turned to face her. Penelope, he began, her name soft on his lips. I'm not good with words like your poet fellows, but I need to say something, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me fumble through it. She nodded, hardly daring to breathe. When I told you my heart don't work, I meant it, he continued. After Shiloh, after watching men I'd called brothers die in the mud, something in me just stopped. I've been wandering ever since, not caring much if I lived or died. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. But since meeting you, something's changed. I find myself wanting things again. Simple things, maybe a place to call home, honest work, quiet evenings. And not so simple things too. His hand reached out tentatively, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I find myself wanting you, Penelope. Your company, your smile, your sharp mind and brave heart. Emotion swelled in Penelope's chest, a feeling so intense it was almost painful. Daniels, I know I'm not what you deserve, he pressed on. You're educated, refined. I'm just a broken-down cowboy with more scars than prospects. But if you could see your way clear to giving me a chance, I swear I'd spend every day trying to be worthy of you. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. You already are, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. From the moment you told me your heart was broken, I wanted to be the one to heal it. Not as your doctor, but as more. The last barrier between them dissolved as Daniels drew her into his arms, his kiss tentative at first, then deepening as she responded with equal fervor. The world narrowed to this moment, this clearing, this man whose broken heart somehow fit perfectly with her own. When they finally drew apart, Daniels pressed his forehead to hers. I can't promise it'll be easy, he murmured. Got a lot of demons still riding my back. And I can't promise I won't frustrate you, she replied with a smile. I'm stubborn and opinionated, and I won't give up my practice. Wouldn't ask you to, he assured her. This town needs its doctor, and I need you, just as you are. Their courtship unfolded through the winter months, as snow blanketed Redemption Creek and transformed it into a glittering wonderland. Daniels purchased the livery stable, throwing himself into the business with unexpected enthusiasm. Penelope continued her medical practice, her reputation growing throughout the county. They faced challenges, the whispers of those who disapproved of their relationship, the occasional return of Daniel's nightmares, Penelope's exhaustion after long days tending to the sick during an influenza outbreak. But they weathered each storm together, their bond strengthening with each trial overcome. By spring's arrival, they were inseparable. Daniels had built an addition onto Penelope's small cabin, a proper bedroom, and an expanded kitchen working in the evenings by lantern light. Penelope had coaxed him into sharing more of his past, listening without judgment as he unburdened himself of memories he'd carried alone for too long. On the first truly warm day in April 1877, Daniels took Penelope back to the clearing by the creek where he'd first declared his feelings. The aspens were budding with new leaves, and wildflowers dotted the grass with splashes of purple and yellow. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold ring. Belonged to my mother, he explained, his voice husky with emotion. Only thing of hers I managed to keep through the war and all the years after. I'd be honored if you'd wear it, as my wife. Penelope's vision blurred with tears as she extended her hand. Yes, she said simply, her voice steady despite the joy that threatened to overwhelm her. With all my heart, yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Daniels gathered her close, his arms strong and sure around her. You did it, you know, he murmured against her hair. Did what? She asked, leaning back to look up at him. His smile was radiant, transforming his weathered face into something beautiful. "Restarted my heart, just like you promised." Penelope laughed, the sound mingling with the babble of the creek and the whisper of new leaves overhead. "And you've made mine stronger than I ever thought possible." They were married 2 weeks later in Redemption Creek's small church, with the entire town in attendance. As they spoke their vows beneath garlands of spring flowers, Penelope thought of how far they had both come, she from her sheltered eastern upbringing, he from the battlefields and lonely trails that had nearly destroyed him. Their journey had only just begun, but as Daniel slipped a wedding band onto her finger to join his mother's ring, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever lay ahead together: the doctor who had dared to restart a broken heart, and the cowboy who had finally found his way home.